My 35-year-old son told me that my only purpose in this world was to be his bank account, and if I couldn't even do that right, then I was completely and utterly worthless. He screamed it at me. His face, the one I had once kissed and adored, was twisted into a mask of pure reptilian rage. And why? Because his monthly allowance, the generous sum I transferred to him on the 1st of every month, every year, for 15 years, was one day late. I had dared to forget. He stood in the middle of my small living room, a place I had fought tooth and nail to keep, and told me that my existence was a simple transaction. My love, my care, my role as his mother, it was all meaningless. My only value was the number in my bank account, and my only function was to transfer it to his. Look at me now. Evelyn, 71 years old. I run a small tutoring business from my home. I help children learn to read, to find the magic in words. My life is small, but it is mine. The money I earn pays my bills. The food I eat, I bought with my own labor. The peace I feel, that is priceless. I had to walk through hell to find it. My name is Evelyn, and for nearly 2 decades I was the willing warden of my own prison. A prison built of love, guilt, and a deep maternal fear. My son Leo was my prisoner, but I was the one who was not free. I was his lifelong nurse, his chef, his maid, and above all, his ATM. I enabled his weakness, I funded his idleness, and I called it love. This is not a story about a spoiled child. This is a story about a parasite who almost devoured his host. It is the story of how one forgotten payment became an act of war, and how I finally learned that the most loving thing a mother can do is to let her child fall, so she can finally learn to stand up herself. This was my Richard, my husband, and this was our Leo. Richard was a bedrock of a man, a civil engineer. He believed in foundations, in structure, in things that were built to last. He adored Leo, but he was firm. The world doesn't owe you a living, son, he used to say. You build your own life, or you'll end up living in someone else's. I wish to God that lesson had stuck. Leo was fragile, or so we were told. He was born with a weak heart, a whisper of a murmur that kept him from playing sports, that made him tire easily. As a mother, your heart breaks. You see your child on the sidelines, watching other kids run and shout, and your every instinct screams, protect him, keep him safe, shield him from every hardship. It became the core of my identity. I was Leo's protector. Richard's death was the crack in our foundation, a brain aneurysm. One day he was here, strong and vital. The next, he was gone. Leo was 19, in his first year of college. The loss shattered him. It shattered me. And in that vast, empty space of grief, my role as his protector went into overdrive. I was all he had left. His fragility, once a medical fact, became an emotional one. He dropped out of college. I can't handle the stress, Mom, he'd say, his voice thin and panicked. My anxiety, my heart, I can feel it pounding every time I walk into a lecture hall. I'm not strong like Dad was. What could I say? I remembered the doctor's warnings from his childhood. I saw his pale face, his trembling hands. I believed him, so I let him come home. That was the first critical mistake. I mistook his retreat for a temporary need for healing. I didn't realize it was the beginning of a permanent occupation. At first, it seemed reasonable. Just until I get on my feet, Mom. I agreed to give him a small allowance, enough to cover his basic expenses, so he wouldn't have to stress about finding a job right away. He needed time to grieve, to find his path. A few months turned into a year. A year turned into 2. His anxiety became his shield and his sword. Any time I would gently broach the subject of him, finding a job, or perhaps finishing a degree online, his face would crumple. The panic would appear in his eyes. You don't understand what it's like for me, Mom, he'd whisper, clutching his chest. The pressure, it's a trigger. My therapist says I need a stable, low-stress environment to avoid a major breakdown. Are you trying to cause a breakdown? He weaponized therapy speak. He used his fragility to make me feel that pushing him toward independence was an act of cruelty. I was a librarian, a woman of gentle heart. The thought of causing my grieving, fragile son a major breakdown was horrifying. So I would back down. I would apologize. And I would continue to pay. The inciting incident, the one that cemented my role as his permanent benefactor, came when he was 23. He had a brilliant idea for an online business, curating and selling rare comic books. It was the first spark of passion I had seen in him in years. He was animated, excited. "This is it, Mom. Something I can do from home. No stress, no boss. But I need startup capital. For inventory, for the website." I was so thrilled to see him engaged that I didn't question it. I took a significant sum from Richard's insurance payout, money I had earmarked for my own retirement, for repairs on the house, and I gave it to him. It was an investment, he called it, an investment in his future. The business failed within a year, not with a bang, but a whimper. He claimed the market was too volatile, and his anxiety prevented him from networking effectively. The money was gone. All of it. When I sat him down, my heart heavy with disappointment, I expected remorse. I expected him to feel the weight of the loss. Instead, I was met with a terrifying, twisted logic. "It's not my fault," he said, his eyes welling up with tears. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. I tried. I really did. "But maybe I'm just broken, Mom. Maybe Dad was the strong one, and I'm just not built for this world. I'm not like other people. I can't handle failure. It will literally kill me." He had created the perfect trap. He defined himself as a person so uniquely fragile that any expectation, any responsibility, was a life-threatening danger. His failure wasn't his fault. It was the fault of his inherent, tragic brokenness. And by extension, it was now my sacred duty to shield him from a world he was not built for. From that day forward, the dynamic was set. I was no longer a mother guiding her son. I was a state-sponsored institution, and he was my sole, permanently disabled citizen. The monthly allowance became his salary. Paying his car insurance, his phone bill, his credit card debt became my job. He was 35 years old, living a life of leisure funded by my dwindling savings, all under the guise of managing his delicate health. The decade of hell that followed wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, grinding, daily erosion of my spirit, my finances, and my hope. He was a ghost in my house, a black hole in my bank account, and I was the one who was truly haunted. The next 15 years were a masterclass in what I now call the tyranny of the fragile. Leo ruled my life, not with an iron fist, but with a trembling hand. His weakness was his superpower. His anxiety was his scepter. And my home, the home Richard and I had built as a sanctuary, became his kingdom of indolence. Life with Leo settled into a grim, predictable routine. He would sleep until noon, emerging from his bedroom not with an apology, but with the weary air of a convalescent. He'd wander into the kitchen where I was, and I would stop whatever I was doing, reading, paying bills, planning my tutoring sessions, to make his breakfast. "Morning, Mom," he'd sigh, sinking into a chair. I had a terrible night. My heart was racing again. This was the opening gambit, the daily reinforcement of his condition. Every conversation began with a reminder of his fragility, a preemptive strike against any suggestion that he might say, look for a job or contribute to the household. How could I ask a man who had just survived a terrible night of heart palpitations to mow the lawn? It would be cruel, inhumane. So I became his everything. I was his chef, carefully preparing low-sodium meals to protect his delicate heart. I was his laundress, washing and folding the clothes he wore to play video games or watch movies in his room. I was his secretary, managing his appointments, the few he had, and paying his bills from my own account. I was his financial planner, constantly juggling my meager librarian's pension, and tutoring income to cover the ever-increasing cost of his existence. The monthly allowance was the cornerstone of our toxic contract. On the first of every month, without fail, I would transfer $2,000 into his account. $2,000. It was more than my own pension. I justified it to myself. Hey, needs to have some independence, I'd think. K needs to be able to buy his own things, to feel like a man. B, what? He wasn't a man. He was a 35-year-old child with a credit card, and I was the one footing the bill. His expenses were a constant, bleeding wound in my finances. His anxiety required remedies. Expensive ones. A new top-of-the-line gaming console to help him de-stress. A subscription to every streaming service imaginable to keep his mind off his worries. A new car, a safe and reliable one, because the stress of his old one breaking down could trigger an episode. I paid for it all. The psychological control was absolute, and it was executed with the precision of a surgeon. He never raised his voice. That wasn't his style. He controlled me with guilt, with the constant threat of his own collapse. One year, my old car finally died. I told him I needed to use some of our savings to buy a small used car for myself, to get to my tutoring students and the grocery store. He looked at me, his face a perfect picture of wounded terror. "Our savings?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, you know that's our emergency fund. That's the safety net. What if I have a real medical crisis? What if I need to be hospitalized? You want to spend our emergency fund on a car for you?" He turned my need into a selfish whim. He positioned my desire for basic transportation as a direct threat to his life. He made me feel monstrously selfish for even considering my own needs. I ended up taking the bus for 6 months, until one of my tutoring families graciously gave me their old vehicle. Leo, of course, saw this not as an act of kindness toward me, but as a victory. He isolated me with the same chilling effectiveness. He saw my friends as a threat. They were voices of reason in a world he needed to be unreasonable. My best friend, Carol, would come over for tea. She'd see Leo at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, lounging on the sofa. She'd later take me aside. "Evelyn," she'd say gently, "this isn't healthy, for him or for you. He's taking advantage of you." Leo had the ears of a bat. He would overhear, and later that night, the performance would begin. He wouldn't be angry. He'd be hurt. I heard what Carol said. He'd murmur, looking down at his hands. "She thinks I'm a leech, a loser. I guess that's what you think too." His eyes would well up. "It's okay. I understand. I'm a burden. I'll pack my things. I'll go live on the street. Maybe the stress will just finish me off." It would probably be a relief for everyone. The emotional blackmail was a nuclear weapon. The image of my fragile son, homeless, dying on the street because of my cruelty, was more than I could bear. No, darling, of course not." I would rush to reassure him, my heart breaking. "Carol doesn't understand. I love you. This is your home." And so I would push my friends away. I would make excuses not to see them. It was easier than facing their judgment, easier than enduring Leo's guilt-inducing performances. My world shrank until it contained only one person, him. I was his sun, his moon, his earth, and his bank. The years between 30 and 35 were the worst. He wasn't even pretending to look for work anymore. He had fully embraced his identity as a professional invalid. He spoke of his condition as if it were a terminal illness. He would leave medical journals open on the coffee table, with articles about anxiety and heart disease circled in red ink. It was a constant, silent reminder of his supposed frailty, a stage set for my perpetual sympathy. He talked about his friends who were getting married, buying houses, having children, but he did it with a tragic air of martyrdom. "It must be nice," he'd sigh, "to have a normal life, to be strong enough for all that. I'm happy for them. I truly am." It was a masterful performance, designed to make me feel a fresh wave of pity and guilt for the life he could never have, a life that I, in my heart of hearts, was beginning to realize he simply did not want. I was living on fumes. My savings were almost gone. I was tutoring more and more hours, a 70-year-old woman working a 40-hour week to support a healthy 35-year-old man. The stress was immense. I was the one having trouble sleeping. I was the one whose heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest. The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed every single day. The breaking point was building, but I couldn't see it. I was like a frog in a pot of slowly boiling water, so accustomed to the rising heat that I didn't realize I was being cooked alive. It would take one small, simple act of forgetfulness to make the water boil over, to make me finally, desperately, leap out of the pot. I enabled him. I know that now. For 15 years, I chose to believe the lie because the truth was too painful to bear. The truth was that my son was not fragile. He was a manipulator. The truth was that I wasn't protecting him. I was crippling him and bankrupting myself in the process. So I ask you this, and I want you to be honest in the comments. Where does a parent's love cross the line into harmful enablement? Is it a mother's duty to provide a safety net? Or is there a point where that net becomes a hammock, encouraging a lifetime of idleness? By shielding him from all of life's hardships, did I commit a form of abuse myself? An abuse of low expectations? I thought I was being kind, but was I actually being cruel, stealing his chance to ever build a life, a character, a soul of his own? Tell me what you think. Is there such a thing as loving your child too much? I was about to find the answer to that question. The first of the month was approaching. It was the day of the sacred transaction. But this month was different. This month, I was tired. So deeply, bone-achingly tired. And my tired mind was about to do something my loving heart never could. It was about to forget. And in that forgetting, my real life was about to begin. The first of the month arrived on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, which is perhaps why it happened. I was exhausted. I had been up late the night before, preparing lesson plans for a new student who was struggling with dyslexia. I woke up with my mind on phonics and sentence structure, not on my son's finances. For the first time in 15 years, the automatic, conditioned response of transferring his allowance wasn't the first thought in my head. I went about my morning. I tutored my first student. I paid my own bills, the electric, the water, the mortgage payment that was becoming harder and harder to meet. I was so focused on my own precarious financial survival that I completely, utterly forgot about his. Leo emerged around his usual time, just after noon. He gave me his customary sigh and report of a rough night. I gave him my customary nod of sympathy and made him his toast. He ate, scrolled through his phone, and then retreated back to his digital cave. The day went on. The transfer remained unmade. The thought never even crossed my mind. It was a simple, profound, and world-altering act of omission. The explosion came at 5:03 p.m. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes. Leo stormed out of his room, his face pale, but this time it wasn't the pale of feigned illness. It was the waxy, furious pale of pure panic. "My card was declined," he said, his voice a tight, strangled knot. He was holding his phone as if it were a dead animal. "Oh?" I said, turning from the sink, my brow furrowed in genuine, unfeigned confusion. "Declined where? Online? I was trying to buy a new upgrade for my game, and it was declined. I tried again. Declined. It said insufficient funds." He was looking at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror and accusation. Did you make the transfer?" And that's when it hit me. The first of the month. The allowance. The sacred, unspoken contract. I had breached it. "Oh my goodness," I said, and my surprise was real. "Leo, I am so sorry. It completely slipped my mind. I was so busy this morning. I'll do it right now." I dried my hands and went to my laptop. But as I sat down, something strange happened. A thought, small and sharp as a needle, pierced the thick fog of my maternal guilt. The thought was this: Ihe is 35 years old. He is in a state of panic because he cannot buy a video game. When? The absurdity of it was staggering. It was like a flash of lightning that illuminated the whole dark, twisted landscape of our lives. I saw, in that one instant, the sheer pathetic monstrosity of the situation I had created. I logged into my bank account. I looked at the balance. It was pitifully low. Enough for the mortgage, enough for groceries for the next 2 weeks, and not much else. And he wanted $2,000 of it. For video games. Another thought came, stronger this time. It was a voice, and it sounded a bit like my late husband, Richard. It was a voice of pure, undiluted common sense. The voice said, Yes. I don't know where the strength came from. Maybe it came from a place of pure exhaustion. Maybe it was the ghost of Richard, finally fed up. I turned to look at my son, who was hovering behind me, radiating impatience. You know, Leo, I said, my voice quiet, but with a new, unfamiliar firmness. I'm not going to do it today. He stared at me as if I had just started speaking in tongues. What? What do you mean? Mom, I need that money. My phone bill is due. My credit card payment. I am very tired, dear, I said, closing the laptop. And my own accounts are lower than I thought. We can talk about this tomorrow. Tomorrow? He shrieked, his voice climbing an octave. The mask of the gentle invalid was cracking. I can't wait until tomorrow. I need it now. What is wrong with you? Just send the money. No, I said again. And this time, it felt good. It felt like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in decades. That was when the monster came out. The creature I had kept fed and comfortable for 15 years, the one that lived behind the facade of the fragile boy, finally showed its true face. What do you mean, no? He roared, and the sheer volume of his voice, a voice I had only ever heard in whispers and sighs, made me flinch. That's my money. You owe it to me. I owe you. I asked, my voice still quiet, but the librarian in me was being replaced by something much tougher. Yes, you owe me, he screamed, his face turning a blotchy, ugly red. I couldn't go to college because of my anxiety. I couldn't get a job because of my heart. I sacrificed a normal life because of this condition. You owe me for that. Your only purpose is to support me, to be my bank account. And if you can't even do that right, then you are completely and utterly worthless. Worthless. He said the word. The final, unforgivable word. And in that moment, he didn't just break the contract. He vaporized it. He freed me. All the love, all the pity, all the guilt that had bound me to him for decades snapped. I looked at him, at this red-faced, screaming man-child, and I felt nothing. The emotional well had finally run dry. All that was left was a cold, hard bedrock of clarity. My liberation began with a single, silent action. While he was still ranting, I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up my phone, and I called the bank. Not to transfer money. Hello? I said, my voice clear as a bell. I'd like to put a freeze on a secondary credit card linked to my account. Yes, the one ending in 4288? That's right. Freeze it immediately. And while you're at it, I'd like to change all of my online banking passwords. Leo stopped screaming. He heard me. He watched as I systematically, calmly, cut his every financial lifeline. The color drained from his face again, replaced by a look of sheer animal panic. He saw his world ending. But that was just the beginning. That was just cauterizing the wound. The real surgery was about to begin. As he stood there speechless, I made my second call. This one was to a lawyer who specialized in family law, and, more specifically, eviction. Hello? I said, looking my son directly in the eye. My name is Evelyn Miller. I need to know the legal process for evicting an adult child from my home. He thought one late payment was the problem. He had no idea. The problem wasn't the allowance. The problem was him. And I was about to solve it, permanently. The student had become the teacher, and my son was about to receive the education of a lifetime. For 15 years, my son had used his supposed weakness as a weapon against me. Now I was going to use my newfound strength as a shield for myself. His declaration that I was worthless had been his fatal mistake. It hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something new, something hard and unbreakable. The days following the freeze were a cold war, fought within the four walls of my home. Leo went through several stages. First was disbelief. He kept trying his card, certain it was a technical glitch. Then came wheedling and bargaining. "Mom, okay, I'm sorry," he said, the picture of contrition. I was stressed. "I didn't mean it. Just turn the card back on and we can forget this ever happened." "I'm not forgetting, Leo," I said calmly. "And the card is not being turned back on." Next came the classic manipulation, the health crisis. He spent an entire day in his room, then emerged, clutching his chest, breathing shallowly. "Mom, I think I need to go to the hospital," he gasped. "My heart, it's been skipping beats all day. It's the stress you're putting me under." The old Evelyn would have flown into a panic. The new Evelyn looked at him, her heart as steady as a drum, and said, "Then I will call an ambulance for you, dear." He paled. An ambulance meant paramedics, questions, a hospital record. It meant his bluff would be called on a grand, official scale. No, don't, he backpedaled quickly. I just need to lie down." He retreated, his most powerful weapon having misfired for the first time. The final stage was sullen. Silent rage. He was a thundercloud in my house, refusing to speak to me, clearly believing he could punish me with his silence. It was the most peaceful week I'd had in a decade. During that week, I was not idle. I met with the lawyer. She was a brilliant, sharp woman who understood the situation immediately. "We will serve him with a formal, written 30-day notice to vacate. If he is not gone by then, we begin the court eviction process." A process server delivered the papers to him on a Friday morning. I will never forget the look on his face as he read the legal document. It was the look of a man who finally understood that the game was truly over. The free ride had crashed. He confronted me in the living room, waving the papers in his hand. The monster was back, but this time I wasn't afraid. "You're kicking me out," he screamed, his voice cracking. "The son with a heart condition? Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" "That, Leo," I said, my voice even and calm, "is a question you should have asked yourself 15 years ago. You are a 35-year-old man. The world is full of places to go and things to do. You just have to be willing to do them. But my anxiety, my health," he pleaded, falling back on his old worn-out script. "Your health is excellent," I said, and this was my checkmate. "I called your doctor's office yesterday. I'm still listed as your emergency contact, you see. I spoke with the nurse. She said Dr. Evans was just telling you at your last physical how remarkable your cardiovascular health is. He said you have the heart of a 20-year-old athlete. Your anxiety, Leo, is a choice. Your idleness is a choice, and I am no longer choosing to fund it." The blood drained from his face. I had checked his facts. I had called his bluff. He had no more cards to play. He just stood there, deflated, a hollowed-out man whose entire identity had just been exposed as a lie. The karmic justice of it all was poetic. Leo, faced with the terrifying reality of having to support himself, actually had to get a job. He didn't have a degree. He had no work history. The only position he could find was stocking shelves overnight at a 24-hour grocery store. The man who claimed his fragile heart couldn't handle the stress of an office job now spends his nights lifting heavy boxes. The son who couldn't be bothered to wake up before noon now works from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He lives in a tiny room he rents from a coworker. His diet is no longer my lovingly prepared meals, but instant noodles and cheap sandwiches. He wanted a life without my rules, without my burden. And he got it. He is finally, truly, independent. And by all accounts, he is miserable. He learned, far too late, that the cage he hated was actually a nest, and he was the one who fouled it beyond repair. As for me, my liberation was absolute. With the $2,000 a month back in my budget, it was like a tidal wave of relief. The financial pressure vanished. I could breathe. I could save. I could invest. not in a dead-end son, but in myself. I renovated my kitchen. I took a trip to the ocean, a trip I'd been putting off for 20 years. Most importantly, I expanded my tutoring business. I found my true calling, my true purpose. It wasn't in being a warden to a grown man. It was here, at this table, helping a child discover the joy of reading. I took the years of my life that he had consumed, and I dedicated them to the future of others. I turned my pain into a purpose that was real and good. My home is no longer a hospital for a fake invalid. It's a school for bright, young minds. It's filled with laughter and learning. It's alive again.